sir. News from the underground.
Hello and welcome to The Underground. This is the podcast where we talk about the world and how crazy and weird and messed up it is. I am Duncan Michael McPherson, and today on the podcast I want to talk about the coronavirus a little bit, and specifically I'm going to focus on wearing masks. And there seems to be a lot of confusion and anger surrounding masks, and it's a hard word to say, masks. And I just want to try to weed through some of the stuff that's being said out there. So let's talk about masks and whether they're important or not important, and try to get to the bottom of it, okay? So, where to begin? Well, I also want to say I'm going to try and make these videos and the podcast 20 minutes long instead of an hour long like it was before, because I think that's more digestible for people. So anyway, that's just a little side note. I want to start with a podcast that I listen to, someone named Michael Osterholm. I don't know if I'm saying Osterholm right, but it sounds right. He was on the Joe Rogan Podcast. He is an American epidemiologist and a professor and director of the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy at the University of Minnesota. So he's worked with the CDC. I think he's worked with, the CDC, the HSS, Department of Health and Human Services. So a pretty smart guy who knows what's going on. So I want to talk about some of the stuff that he said on the podcast. Now, this podcast took place on March 10th, so a while back, before things really hit the fan and we closed down schools and really started to prepare for this coronavirus and started doing things about it. So some of this information that I'm basing a lot of my opinions about this is old information. Some of it could be different now. Just to explain a little bit about who this guy is, he wrote a book called Deadliest Enemy, Our War Against Killer Germs, which when I heard that he wrote this book, I thought it was a little fear-mongering, I guess. Like, it seems like an extreme title. He wrote that in 2017 with Mark Olshaker. I don't know if I'm saying that right either. Anyway, so the point being is that when I listened to this podcast to get some idea of what was going on in the world with this coronavirus stuff, it kind of freaked me out, and it made me take this thing more seriously, because in the past it's been, well, what people are, I think the reason that people are not wearing masks now and people are freaking out is because in the past it's been lie after lie. You know, like we had SARS and people were acting like it's the end of the world. Not people, the media in particular is acting like it's the end of the world. And it was, you know, a serious disease, but it was short-lived and it wasn't what people said it was. In some ways, the same thing happened with COVID-19. People were really freaked out by it. It did kill a lot of people. It did make a lot of people very sick. But it wasn't as bad as we were told it was going to be. And I understand that there's like a need to tell people it's going to be worse than it is to make sure that they take it seriously. But the boy who cried wolf. You lie to people, they're going to stop believing you. Bottom line. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from with this whole coronavirus thing. I'll say that my opinion on masks is I think that it doesn't hurt to wear masks. I like what Ben Shapiro has said about masks. Like it doesn't take anything to wear them, so let's just wear them. And if it doesn't work at all, no big deal. All you had to do was wear a stupid mask. So I think we should probably just wear them when we're in crowded places, but people are freaking out about people not wearing them while they're jogging. And if you go to the WHO's website, the WHO, they say not to wear it when you're running. So I don't know why people are making such a big deal out of things like that. So I just want to get to the bottom of some of this stuff. Okay. So let's talk about the coronavirus and what it is. Now, I'm going to quote some things from Michael Osterholm. Okay. He said on Joe Rogan's podcast, and this is March 10th. This is before we knew anything about this virus, or at least as regular people before we knew anything about it, because I think the media played with us a lot. So he basically says that it's let's see. I'm just going to read what he says. He says, first of all, let's step back. The primary mechanism for transmission is just the respiratory route. It's just breathing. In studies in Germany, which have just been published literally in the last 24 hours, they actually followed a group of people who had been exposed to somebody in an automobile manufacturing plant, and then they had 9 people that with this exposure, he said, if you have any symptoms at all, contact us. We want to follow up with you. And they all agreed. Well, they all got infected. Okay. He says infections. He talks about SARS, the first SARS, because this is considered the SARS-2. That people were getting incredibly high levels of virus, sometimes 10,000 times that we saw with SARS in their throats, meaning that they were infectious at that point already, and they hadn't even had symptoms yet of really any nature. They weren't coughing yet, and that's where we're concerned, because that's the kind of transmission. I've always said trying to stop influenza virus transmission is like trying to stop the wind. We've never had anything successfully do that other than a vaccine, and we don't have a vaccine here. So part of what he's saying is that this is respiratory, and it's travels through the air. I think he might be a little more clear. Oh, here in this quote here, he's talking about masks here. So let's talk about what he says about masks, which I don't know if I agree with everything he said, but I think he gives us an idea of a reasonable way to start thinking about masks. He says there's 2 kinds. Basically, the surgical mask, which just fits over. The reason it's called a surgical mask is because it's too loose fitting. It just fits, kind of ties behind you. It was worn by surgeons so they don't cough or drip into your wound. It was never made to protect you from bugs coming in. So those little spaces on the sides, that's not a problem if I'm breathing into a cloth right in front of my nose. But in terms of air coming in on the side, they're not effective at all. People wear them. They look like they're doing something. They're not. Now, I don't know if I agree entirely with that. It seems like it might stop some of the air coming in, or some of the air might be filtered through the actual cloth, and some of it might come in through the sides. He goes on to say, now if you are sick, they may help a little bit from you transmitting, because if you cough, then you cough right into the cloth, and some of it will embed in there and not get out around. The other one, though, is called an N95 respirator, but for all intents and purposes, it looks like a mask. It's just tight face fitting, and it has a seal at the nose, etc. So what he's saying is those N95 masks would work. We don't have enough of them. And the problem is, I think he goes on to say that we should have been stockpiling. And if you look at numbers in places like Taiwan, which there's a lot going on with Taiwan and China, because China doesn't consider Taiwan as an independent country. It considers it as part of Taiwan, or part of China. Taiwan's part of China. And Taiwan considers itself an independent country. So I don't know if you saw that video where they asked the WHO person about Taiwan, they defer to calling it China because they're in bed with China, which is scary, but that's a whole nother podcast. So the point being that N95 masks were readily available in Taiwan, and that's why hardly anybody got sick or died in Taiwan. Now, I haven't checked the numbers in a long time on that, but when I was paying more attention to this thing and how it was developing, it was clear that Taiwan was crushing it as far as stopping this virus. Much better than we did in Canada or the U.S. So we should have been, and Michael Osterholm says this in this podcast with Joe Rogan. He says we should have been stockpiling N95 masks so that we could be ready for this, and we didn't. And I think like going forward, obviously we need to do that. Like this whole mask fiasco wouldn't be an issue if we had N95 masks for everybody. We could have crushed this virus dead right away, and we didn't. Okay. Yeah, he goes on to say that we need more of them. We should have been stockpiling. But anyway, it's too late for that for this virus, at least. Oh, the other thing I want to tackle with the whole mask thing that's kind of related is this whole, he says this whole issue of using your hands, touching your face, that people all concentrate on. That was pretty early on when people were saying, don't touch your face, wash your hands. He says the data is actually very weak that this kind of virus is going to be transmitted that way. I wouldn't tell you to stop using hand sanitizer, but don't think it's going to have a big impact on this bug because it's airborne. Okay, so we know the virus is airborne. They knew it since March 10th. For some reason, that information, I don't know if I want to say it's been withheld, but it hasn't been publicly, it hasn't been made as public as I think it should have been, that this is an airborne virus. Hand sanitizers are great, but they're not really effective against this virus. And the other thing is that the mask, like air gets out of the mask. And if we look at where this virus hit hardest, so the three places that I think this virus hit the hardest was New York City was really bad. Italy was really bad. And I think it was Spain, but now I'm having a brain fart. I think Spain was really bad too. These are small places with a lot of people, a lot of apartment buildings and things like that. I mean, apartment building, if for an airborne virus, is probably the worst place you could be because the air is getting recycled. And I don't think that the filtering of the air through air conditioning it was March, so heating, is going to take this virus out. At least it doesn't seem like it based on how hard it hit those three places. So places like, I live in Chatham, outside of Chatham. Chatham-Kent is not making masks mandatory right now because Dr. Colby, who is, I don't know his official title, but he's like the health guy for all Chatham-Kent. He's saying that we're not going to make masks mandatory because they're not effective. And the other thing, and one of the reasons he gives in this article that I'm reading from, I'll post it in the YouTube thing. It's from the Chatham Voice. One of the reasons he gives is that we're very dispersed in Chatham-Kent. There's not like a lot of people in a small area like there is in New York and Spain and Italy. Okay. There's also like not very many apartments. There's some motels and stuff, but like apartment buildings aren't like huge like they are in New York and Toronto and things like that. So an apartment building, I would think, this is going off of my own understanding of how a virus works, would be just air getting breathed in by 100 different people all day. So if one person gets hit, it's likely that it's going to spread very quickly in apartment buildings, which is what I think happened in New York. Again, this is all speculative. I don't know that for sure. It just seems to fit with what we've been told about this airborne nature of the virus. Okay. The WHO on masks. What does the WHO say about masks? Originally, they said that it's not effective and we shouldn't be wearing them. Then they said that we should be wearing them. So what do we listen to? It's hard to trust an organization that tells us one thing and then tells us a completely different thing. So this is more of a mess up when it comes to the media, when it comes to big organizations like the World Health Organization and the CDC not being clear and honest about information. I think what the WHO admitted eventually was that they were trying to save the N95 masks, maybe all masks, but I don't think that's, I think it was the N95 masks they were concerned about, because those are the ones that work, saving those for people in the hospitals, nurses and doctors, right? So they didn't want regular people going out and buying all the N95 masks like they bought a bunch of toilet paper for some reason. So what they told us was that they're not effective. Now, when you start lying to the public like that, you just lose faith. Like, I don't believe anything that the World Health Organization says, and that's the wrong attitude to have. I know it is, but it's just hard to trust an organization when they tell you one thing and then say, "Oh, we lied to you because we were trying to protect you." If they were just honest from the beginning, or if they delayed telling us anything until they could get all the N95 masks or something different than what they did, I think it would have been a lot better. But because they've misled people, and the CDC did this too, I forget what it was about specifically, but they said something about masks and then took it back. If you're lying to people, you're losing their trust, and they're not going to do the right thing. They're not going to listen to you because they don't know who to trust. They don't know what the right thing is anymore because they can't trust the WHO, which, I think a lot of people, for me at least, I trusted the World Health Organization. They seem like they're there for the right reasons. They're doing good things. Like, I've referenced their things before as fact, but now I don't know. Can I trust them? It sounds like if they feel like lying gets to the best, result, then that's okay. And that doesn't make me trust them at all. So, I mean, this goes back to a Catholic principle that the means to an end, the means can never justify the end, meaning that you can never have an evil means to get to a good end. And this is a clear indication of why that's so important, and not just like a pious Catholic thing to believe, but that it affects the way people look at the World Health Organization now. 20 minutes goes by fast. Okay, the last person I want to talk about is very important. His name's Brett Weinstein, or Weinstein. I think it's Weinstein. He has his own podcast. He's been on the Joe Rogan show, all that stuff. He's an evolutionary biologist. I have his biography here on Wikipedia. American biologist and evolutionary theorist. I would say he's a left winger. He takes coronavirus very seriously, much more seriously than most people. And he's been. So one of the things he did is at the very beginning, when the WHO was saying don't wear masks, Brett Weinstein was saying, this is ridiculous. We know masks work. We know it's an airborne thing. Everybody should be wearing masks. Now, this contradicts a little bit of what Michael Osterholm said. So I trust both of these guys for some reason, I guess because, I don't know, listening to them talk, they seem trustworthy. And they seem like they know what they're talking about. Now, Brett Weinstein is a little more, seems a little more conservative about these issues, or this issue, the coronavirus thing. So, he's very big on masks. He thinks that they're very important. But he also understands that if you're going outside, you don't need a mask. Unless you're going to be in close quarters, like, in a riot or a protest, then you should be wearing a mask. But if you're walking down the street, you don't need a mask unless it's a really busy street. Then you do need a mask. So I think there's some sense that we need to take from all this. And so what do I come to? What is the conclusion I want to come to? Because we're already at 20 minutes and I'm already over time. I would say wear masks where it's appropriate. Indoors with tight quarters with people, you need to wear a mask. I mean, I was just looking up the Canada national website for the recommendations for masks, and it says masks are not going to stop this virus, but masks will are recommended in tight quarters, like shopping malls and or stores or public transportation. So it's really important that we have them in those tight spaces, just so we're not breathing all of our stuff in everybody else's faces. But if we're outside, we don't need masks, right? If you're going for a jog, I forget what website I checked, but one of them says if you're jogging, you shouldn't wear a mask. It said that right in there, and people are so upset because this person's not wearing a mask, and it's getting a little ridiculous. And I think it has to do with this political stuff that's coming from this coronavirus, that the conspiracy theories and the political right versus left thing that goes on with everything. But of course, it has to be with a virus, which has nothing to do with politics, and it shouldn't really be in the conversation of politics at all. But I digress. So the point is, like, use masks. They're probably a good idea in tight spaces, but we don't have to go crazy about it because they don't work as well. They're not a lifesaver. They're not the answer to this problem. It sounds like we need a vaccine, or people are going to get it and people are going to die and get sick. One thing that Brett Weinstein talked about that I think is important is that one thing that opened my eyes to how serious this virus is that the damage it does to your organs. And Brett Weinstein, I haven't looked into this much, but Brett Weinstein said that it does serious damage to your organs. So that's scary, because even if you don't die from it, that seems worse to me. Like people will die from diseases all the time, and obviously a lot of people have died from coronavirus, but not as many as we thought, and the death rates aren't as catastrophic as everyone was saying they were at the beginning. I think it's about double the flu, or maybe a little more than double what the flu kills in a year. But the damage that this disease does, I don't know for sure yet. So Brett Weinstein is saying that it does damage to your organs. So I want to look more into that and maybe bring that up on another podcast, because this one is already over 20 minutes. Maybe we'll go 25 minutes. That sounds like a good plan. Okay. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say about masks. Let's just be sensible about it. We don't have to go crazy. I'm really tired of people getting shamed online because of masks. It doesn't make any sense, and this turned into this whole political circus, which everything turns into a political circus these days. It just seems like that's the way we go now. We go crazy political with everything, and and calling people out and shaming people for things, which I just don't think is very helpful. And we should all be getting through this coronavirus thing with as little like anger and hatred and frustration as possible, and it's not happening so far at all. Okay, that's all I gotta say. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Thank you for listening to The Underground, the podcast where we talk about the world and how crazy and weird and messed up it is. I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to be posting on YouTube, and I shaved my head for those who haven't seen it yet. Thank you for listening. Please like it, share it, comment on YouTube, share it on all the social media things. It's cool to do. Thanks. God bless. Bye. From